subject today is negative painting, and we will be practicing it on some spring tulips. This is our reference photo. It's on Unsplash. I'm painting today on 300-pound watercolor paper, Kilimanjaro brand. I sketched out the focal points, so just this group of flowers, and I kind of very lightly indicated these and these. We really don't have to sketch anything. This is kind of free-flowing, loose watercolor that we will be trying to do today. To wrap my head around the scale of the painting and not to have them, too small or something like that, it helps to just put one line, very lightly, just one line around these flowers to get the idea of the scale. They will probably get washed away with, watercolor when we start painting, but we will retain that visual, right? And it will help us to get started, because it's kind of scary to start on an empty sheet of paper. But at the same time, we don't want a bunch of lines underneath the watercolor that will kind of spoil our painting, right? To refresh our memory, negative painting is when we paint around something in our painting, when we paint around it. The most common use of that technique in watercolor is because we don't have white. We use the white of the paper for our white subjects, right? And we have to paint around it, and that's when we do negative painting. So if your background is darker than the subject or parts of the subject, you have to paint negatively around those areas, because we can't cover dark areas with white paint. We don't have it, right? We do have it, but we try not to use it too much because it's not going to look right in watercolor. So if we wanted to paint this kind of the long way, the difficult way, we would just paint each area with different colors. We will paint the flowers, we will paint the leaves, and it will take a long time and it will be hard. So I thought, is there a way to speed up this process? And I thought, the leaves are dark for the most part. They have some highlights, but for the most part, they're very dark, and portions of the flowers are dark. What if we apply a colorful wash to paint all these flowers, the lighter areas of the flowers? That wash will probably be okay under the leaves, right? Especially if it's a color like yellow or orange or something like that. Yellow is part of the green. We get green by mixing blue and yellow. So would it matter if there is something already under all these leaves? And I'm thinking probably not. It will speed up our process. We don't have to avoid all these leaves, and especially we don't have to avoid all those dark areas. Having an under wash, under shadows, will give us depth and kind of visual interest, variety in the paint. I think that's going to work. So we're going to find out right now, and we will start painting with a free-flowing colorful wash. When I say the words free-flowing wash, we immediately think painting wet on wet, right? So I need to start on damp paper, which I'm going to do by just spritzing it with water. I want some flow, but I don't want like a ton of water on paper. I just want it damp. And of course, I need to spritz my colors. I'm going to use a big brush. This is probably a little bit of an overkill. This is the 1.5 inches that I have, but don't use something super tiny, because that will kind of restrict the amount of water that you will have, restrict your movements, so it will be hard to use. So kind of medium-sized brush. This is our chance to use all our yellows, all our pinks, oranges, so just don't worry about the colors that I'm using, just use whatever you have. If your tulip is not, exact shade of yellow that you see in the reference photo, who cares, right? It doesn't really matter. And I'm looking at the reference, and I'm vaguely kind of following what I see there, but at the same time, it just really no big deal about, capturing all the colors accurately. Nobody will know what you saw there in the reference. You don't have to tell them, you don't have to show them, and just paint very fun kind of free-flowing wash. The color doesn't need to be super intense. I painted a little sketch. You know, I thought the colors need to be really bright. We do want some intensity, but don't over darken it right from the start, because we will paint some details on the flowers, so you don't want them to be super dark right from the beginning. So this all, you see where I see the leaves, this all can be just yellow or orange or whatever color. So just take it all the way out to the edges. I got some purple mixed in, that's fine, accidentally. And this yellow can go all the way out. And I think you will agree that this is way easier than painting each flower separately and trying to keep it all in the right place. Let's use some, I guess I'll stick to opera pink, but we can use other pinks as well. I have this magenta here that can be interesting for these flowers. Mix it with opera pink maybe. I'm almost running out. I was painting so much with opera pink. Maybe switch back to yellow. Go this on this side. There's another yellow flower here, so this will be good. Okay, let's look on this side. We need to connect these. I switched to lemon yellow. Oops. Like I said, the exact color does not really matter. I feel like I can drop in some more orange. I mean opera pink, but it gives me orange. And let's balance the bottom with the top. We see some more those purple ones here. My watercolors are a little bit messed up. I was painting, so I have some purple inside opera pink, but it's actually creates interesting effects here on my page. Get this, and there's some yellow there in the back. We will add that. And this is our wash. So very quick, very easy first step. And we will let it dry. I'm going to switch to my 3/4 inch. Make sure I saturate it with water really well. And in terms of color for leaves, again, it really doesn't matter. Those tulip leaves look to me kind of cool green with yellow tips, kind of warmer tips. So since I'm working on, let's say, mid-tone right now, I will go with probably Cascade green. So it's a cool green, but not super intense or dark or anything like that. And you will have to look at your greens, guys, and decide which one. Or you can mix it, right? You can mix it from blue and yellow if you want. So here is our negative painting. I'm going to paint around those flowers, looking not at the subject, but at the edge between the leaf and the flower. And again, if a shape doesn't look right, or you didn't quite get it in the first go, just leave it alone. Don't try to fix it at the detriment of your painting. And it doesn't matter. You can have a few more flowers, different size shapes or something like that. That's why I think we often pick, I see teachers pick flowers a lot of times as subjects, because it's an organic form. And it's really, you know, you don't have to be super precise when you paint them. You can kind of have some freedom and some fun with them. Okay, so this flower, there's some darker flowers there. There's some leaves here that I'm going to paint. Again, like I said, trying to look for edges. So leaf here. And use the shape of your brush to help you, because by turning it, you know, different angles, you can just make our lives a little bit easier in creating all these shapes. This is all green here. It's a slow process, but it's a lot faster than trying, I'm sure you know from experience, it's a lot faster than trying to paint all these flowers like little area by little area. Okay, so this one. And I'm leaving these little spaces. As you see in the photo, there are like flowers peeking through behind there. So that's what we want to do too, right? We don't want like a solid green background. We'll let it breathe a little bit, right? Leave this way. There's a big one here. And I'm slightly varying the intensity of the green, but not very much. I just want it to be obvious that, you know, there are some leaves here. Okay, we can even start creating shadows while everything is wet. We have to be a little bit careful. I'm going to use a mixture of phthalo blue with my Cascade green. Like here, this is still wet, but we can start creating soft shadows, right? When you hear the word soft, it means painting wet on wet. And see, you don't want this, right? Because these sharp angles are not going to work well, at least in this case. So try to always check the edges and make sure that they look right, because this is all that it's all about the edges in this technique. I remember for the longest time I couldn't understand what are edges, what edges are we talking about? But it's, you know, where two forms meet, that area, depending how you treat it, that's, you know, will give you different results and different kind of people will perceive you painting differently. You see, as I started adding those shadows, my painting immediately kind of looked better and started to take shape a little bit. And like I said, try leaving a little bit of breathing room for those leaves. Don't try to cover like every little square inch of your painting. So variety here is key, right? Those leaves are kind of looking in every different direction and looking towards us, so it's good to make them darker in some areas, lighter in other areas, warmer, cooler. It all adds to the interest of our painting. Okay, and through here, I'll try to speed up a little bit, guys, not to bore you to death with all these leaves. This is a big green shape here. So we will paint around this flower. Big shape here. There's a flower behind there, so we will leave a little bit of space, but this will be a big shape. Paint around this one. This is all connected. Try not to mess up this one, right? Don't paint over it. Okay, and this is all here, and maybe a couple leaves here. Okay, and now I need to do something here for shadows. Running out of Cascade green too, so this will be kind of darker towards this flower. Deepen the color. Important, guys, not to skip on pigment, right? If you just make this a puny kind of pale wash, the flowers are not going to stand out. So we need to apply quite a bit of paint to create the shadows and create the depth of space. Okay, so this is the first pass. What do we see now? So the leaves have a little bit of variation and some definition, but the flowers look flat, right? So we need to add a little bit of detail to flowers, but again, edges will be the most important thing. So some edges will be hard and some edges will be soft, and we need to, it's easy to see if we squint when looking at the reference photo. See how these flowers are kind of, they darken and then they kind of disappear into this shadow, right? It's really hard to tell where this flower ends and, you know, the shadow begins. But right here, the leaf is light and you can see very defined edge, right, between the flower and the leaf. So this is what I'm talking about. We have to look for all these details. That's what creates realism and interest in our painting, is all these edges that we catch. Like here, it's very hard to tell when one leaf ends and another one begins, but we clearly see the edge on this leaf. And with the leaves, it's easy because we can take opaque white like ink or gouache, mix it with green watercolor, and we will paint all these highlights. It's not a problem, but we do need to create those soft transitions between the flowers and the shadow and the leaves, right? So that will be our next step. What I can do, I'm thinking, is soften this edge because that shadow kind of encroaches on the flower. Maybe drop in a little bit of magenta there to deepen it, and I can create detail and interest in the flower with this. And of course they will have centers, right? They will have little spaces between the petals, which we can do at this stage as well. And this can be all dark, or we can go back to even opera pink maybe and bring some up here. Here, kind of go lightly. It's better to have less detail than to kind of torture them too much and kind of over dry them. So I'm being a little bit cautious here because, like I said, we want detail, but I don't want too much detail, right? I just want a hint that these are tulips and that they have this kind of darker openings and they have petals, but I don't want them to be too overworked and too dark. So adding details to the flowers in the next step, and trying to vary the paint as well. Use magenta, use opera pink. Give them another wash of opera pink. Maybe connect these a little bit more. See, because they're pointing their little heads towards us, the little openings, and they need to be light, right? We don't want to over darken them. Let's do this one as well. And we need to create the shadow. So Opera Pink, and I'm dragging some of that wet paint into the flower to create the shadow. Asking myself constantly the question, do I see a hard edge or do I see a soft edge? So the bottoms most likely will be soft edges, and on the tops we have more definition, and we most likely will have hard edges. Have a lot of shadow material here. So as you see, the flower is starting to look a little bit more natural, right? These are interesting because they have those stripes on them. So I'm still going to use magenta to give them details, and also create the shadows at the same time. Again, trying very hard not to overdo it. And working fairly quickly and fairly lightly. Do a little transition with yellow. Transition this one. So a little goes a long way here, right, as we say. Okay, let's work on these guys. These are the lightest, so we want the least amount of shadow here. It's a few brush strokes, but we do want to separate it from the background. This orange one is kind of interesting. I like to make orange. I have a couple of oranges, but they're totally unsuitable. Really beautiful orange can be mixed from lemon yellow and opera pink. Especially for flowers, you get kind of peachy color. So I think it works great for certain types of flower. And then you can add a little more opera pink if you need to, or more yellow, and get the color variation. Okay, this is this one. It will have shadows as well, and we have this one, which is also a lot of pink and orange, even more pink I would say than orange. Intense color here and over here. I'm almost done, guys, so I just want to show you the highlights and we will be done. So dark openings here on this flower, it's dark here. Need to do something for this yellow, just a hint. Okay, this kind of looks ugly. Let me put a couple brush strokes here. Okay, and this is very light flower right there. I guess we'll leave it. I can paint like a couple of shadows with lemon yellow on it, just to, you know, say that it's a tulip as well. But that's about all I would do with the flowers. Now that our painting is progressing nicely, if we evaluate the result, you can tell that some of the shadows need to be darker. So it will take me just a second to do that. I think I'm going to use magenta. I'm going to mix it into my phthalo blue to give me kind of, I would say, inky kind of purple color, but with a lot of blue in it. And I'm going to neutralize it with green. Magenta with Cascade Green will give you really beautiful purple, and phthalo blue gives it even more intensity. So in some areas I want to deepen the shadows to give my painting even more depth. And again, don't do it everywhere. Just look at the reference and try to find, squinting really helps. Try to find just a few very dark spots where this is necessary to bring out the flowers. You see, I did it just around this area and immediately it gives me more depth of space. Those leaves are very complicated and it will take hours to paint them exactly as they are in this. If you have the patience for it, that's great, but I don't, so that's why I'm showing you this quick kind of technique. So you can do it even if you don't have a lot of time or you don't feel like spending hours and hours on this painting. And I think it's kind of easier to work like that too, because it's less restricting. If you can do this, then you can, you know, make it more and more detailed and more complex if you wanted to. So just deepening the shadows around the flowers to bring them out and give them kind of ground them, give them some substance. Not super dark here, so we will leave it. Maybe just, you know, connect our leaves to the edges of the paper, make it, you know, painting needs to make sense. Define this one a little bit better. Okay, this is for the depth of space. This needs to dry, obviously. I do want to show you the highlights, the difference that highlights will make on this painting. I am going to use gouache, I'm thinking, guys, today. I don't feel like using ink, so we need clean space, right? And I have a separate container of water. I washed my brush in it, I guess one time, but it's still pretty clean water. So you don't want to, definitely don't use the water where you were washing your brush with phthalo blue and all that, because all that pigment is going to get dragged onto your painting. And I'm going to use, again, we need a pointy brush for details. This is Asian art brush, kind of short bristles, but any small brush that you have is going to work. You can also use angled brush again. This is 1/2 inch, or if you have something smaller, dagger brush will be good. This dagger brush, maybe even dagger brush will be better, but we'll see. So let's look at the reference photo. Do we see white highlights? I see, the only place I see them is on that flower, but that flower is not in my focal point, so I really don't want to draw too much attention to it. So I'm thinking if I just highlight some areas on these flowers if I need to, but definitely need some highlights on the leaves. So let's start with the leaves. And it's best not to use white for highlights, right? If you don't see white, definitely tone it down. I'm going to use my lemon yellow. I'm going to mix it with watercolor. I'm going to try to find some points and some highlights in the leaves. The complicated forms here. And I need another brush to soften some of the edges that I'm creating. So I definitely see one here. Goes down. They kind of intersect with each other and go inside and out. So it's, like I said, this takes a while, this painting, but it's faster than doing it the other way. Okay, there's some highlights here. We can add this one, yeah, is very, my shadows are still wet, but I'm kind of using it to my advantage because I can move that paint and make my painting more interesting, right? Sometimes the gouache mixes with that wet paint, sometimes it doesn't, so it all creates visual interest in my painting. Of course, I will do a few here. You see how it immediately comes to life, right? Wouldn't you agree? And like I said, if you dry the painting first, you will of course it will look a little bit different, but you know, it will still work fine if you want to stop. Okay, these are highlights on the leaves. Let's see if we can give a little more definition to the flowers. I'm thinking with pink, I need to do something with pink. I am going to mix it with my white gouache to get a very light pink color. And this is my chance to correct the edges. If I'm like this one, you see it's kind of jagged edge, but in the reference photo it's smooth, so it's my chance to kind of get it all straightened out and corrected a little bit. I'm getting the shadow is leaking into the flower, but because I didn't wait, but it's okay. Give them a little texture. This one is very light on the bottom, and I didn't quite catch it, so we're going to lighten this one and give it a little more interest with the petals. Maybe here, highlights. So basically adding highlights, right, to the petals, but we don't want them bright white because they're not. We want them very subtle. These guys can use some highlights on the edges of the petals, but they're pretty dark, so it's important not to overdo it. Just tell the viewer, you know, there was a tulip with brightly lit edges. This one is yellow, kind of got lost there. This guy looks lost. Give him a little more definition. So this is how I would finish this painting. And another quick thing I want to do is add highlights to this guys, but of course I need yellow, right? And I don't need that lemon yellow because they're saturated yellow colors, so I'm going to mix some new gouache into white gouache and give these guys some highlights. And it's also a chance for me to cover any pencil lines that got, you know, started to interfere. You probably can't see them, but I can see just faint pencil lines, which is can be very annoying. But we will get rid of them with white gouache. Help other artists to see this video by liking or sharing it. To see future videos, subscribe and click the bell button to be notified when they're published. Thanks again and stay creative!